Hello and welcome to Drunkon Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Bretonnian Peasant Bowmen for your games of Warhammer The Old World. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with Zandri dust and I'm going to paint all the underclothing to the model. So it's this bit of fabric here showing from underneath his robes. As well as his stockings, and he's got some visible on his arms as well. So make sure you catch all of these areas of underclothing with a couple of layers of Zandri dust. This paint isn't going to give us fantastic coverage on the first coat, just make sure you keep the paint nice and thin and come through in a couple of layers and build up to a nice solid coat of Zandri dust all over the under fabric. At this stage I'm also going to catch the bow as well. This will give us a nice light wooden effect on the bow. So just make sure you also catch the bow with a couple of layers of Zandri dust as well. With that Zandri dust applied, you can see we've built up to a nice solid base coat on all of his underclothing and the bow. Now the next step is we're going to paint most of his overcoat. So for this I'm coming in with Corvus black. I'm going to paint all of the overcoat to the model. So it'll be these parts here hanging down by his legs. See the bits of sleeve as well. I'm also going to catch this armoured part here on his upper half. I'm going to catch all of this with a couple of layers of Corvus black to build up to a nice solid light black colour all over his fabric. Doesn't matter if you catch this over any of the strapping at this stage, we'll be coming back in with a later colour to paint these areas later. Now after that Corvus black has been applied, you can see we've built up to a nice even black colour all over his outer clothing. Now the next step, we're going to start painting his hood. So for this I'm coming in with Mephiston red. I'm just going to paint all of the hood area on the model. So obviously be the hood part here, as well as this part coming down around his neck. I'm just going to make sure I catch all of this with a couple of layers of Mephiston red to build up to a nice smooth even base coat of red all over the model. Now because in the old world you use regiments of lots and lots of models, I'm doing a nice quick easy paint job on this miniature to allow us to replicate it a lot of times as we paint the entire regiment of peasant bowmen. So you have a nice quick easy block of bowmen for your games of the old world. After that Mephiston red has been applied, you can see we've got that nice solid red coat all over his hood. The next one I'm going to paint that little bit of strapping on his bow. For this I'm using Rawk flesh. I'm just going to catch all of this strapping on his bow with a couple of layers of Rawk flesh. Being nice and careful when I'm around the Zandri dust we painted on the bow. Just going to make sure I catch all of this with a couple of layers of Rawk flesh. And with that strapping painted, the next step is I'm going to come in and paint all of the skin on the model. For the skin, I'm going to use Bugman's Glow. I have to be nice and careful as I come in to catch all of the skin on his face and his hands. if like me, you're using this face here that's got the eye patch, after you've painted the skin, come in with a little bit of black and catch the eye patch. A lot of the heads in the box don't have the eye patch, in which case you won't need to worry about that step. Just make sure you catch all of the skin with a layer of Bowmen's glue. Just be nice and careful when you're around the other colours we've already painted. Just in a couple of smooth thin layers, build up to a solid coat of Bowmen's glue all over his skin. And with that Bowmen's glue applied, you can see we've painted in all of the skin, and I've painted in his eye patch with some black as well. So now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to come in and paint any leather on the model. It's going to be these straps and his belt going around his waist and his chest. I'm going to make sure I pick these out with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. I'm also going to pick out his shoes with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide as well. Being nice and careful when I'm around that Xandri dust of his stockings. And this little arm guard here, I'm going to make sure I catch this with some Rhinox hide as well. And with that Rhinox hide applied, that's all of the leather details picked out on the model. Now there's just one last base coat left to apply, and that will be the little bits of metallic detail that are on the model. For this, I'm coming in with lead belcher. I'm just going to pick these parts here, the top and the bottom of his bow. As well as any of these studs on his jacket here. Just be nice and careful, just picking out these raised studs with a little bit of lead belcher. And with that lead belcher applied, that is all the base coats applied to the model. So the next step is to shade the miniature. So the first shade I'm coming in with is Reichland Flesh Shade. I'm going to apply this all over the skin to the miniature. So obviously be nice and careful, try not to get this over any of the other colours we've painted. Just catch all of the skin with a shade of Reichland Flesh Shade. Now with some Agrax Earth Shade, I'm going to come in and shade the bow. This will darken down that wood, and strapping to help give it that nice wooden effect. And thinning the shade down with a little bit of water, I'm also going to catch all of the underclothing to the model. So everything we paint with Xandri dust, I'm just going to give this a shade of Agrax Earth Shade. And now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to come in and shade everything else on the miniature. So it'll be all the rest of his fabric, so the hood and his oversuit, all of the lead belcher and the Rhinox hide, and obviously any metallic details. I'm going to catch all of this with a shade of Nuln Oil. Ensure this doesn't pool too bad in any of the areas. If you do find it's pooling too much, you can come in with a dry brush and wick it away. Just make sure you shade all the rest of the model with some Nuln Oil. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after those shades have dried, you see you've really added definition all over the miniature. So the next step is to start highlighting the model. First of all, with some Ushabti bone, I'm going to come in and dry brush this all over the bow. You can be quite heavy with this dry brush. Just want to make sure you catch all of the bow, lighten it up with some Ushabti bone, and give it the effect of wood. And once that dry brush has been applied, you can see it's lightened up the bow and given us a nice light wood effect all over his bow. So now with some Bowmen's Glow, I'm going to come in and start highlighting the skin. So first of all, I'm coming in and applying Bowmen's Glow on all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the Reichland flesh shade has settled in a recess, coming in on either side of that with some Bowmen's Glow, bringing it back up to its original colour. You can see here on the hand, it's settled into all these creases and recesses. So I'm coming in with Bowmen's Glow and lightening those raised areas back up to colour, but leaving that Reichland flesh shade showing in all the recesses. Now with some Cadian flesh tone, I'm going to come in and apply this in the middle of the areas that I just applied the Bowmen's Glow, so leaving a little bit of Bowmen's Glow showing on all the raised areas, focusing this Cadian flesh tone onto the most raised parts of the model. You can see here where we've got the Reichland flesh shade and the Bowmen's Glow, just applying a little bit of this Cadian flesh tone towards the most raised details. With those two colours applied, you can see it's brightened the skin up, added some definition, so now there's just one more colour left to apply to highlight the skin. That'll be with some Kislev flesh. I'm going to come in and just do a little spot highlight on the most raised detail. So it's things here like the tip of his nose, just catching this with some Kislev flesh. Also going to apply it to his bottom lip and his chin. On the hands, I'm going to apply it to the tips of the fingers and the knuckles, just to really make these details stand out and brighten them up. And with that Kislev flesh applied, that is the skin highlighted. So the next thing we're going to highlight is his underclothing. To highlight this, I'm coming in with Zandri Dust again, and much like with the skin, I'm applying it in all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So I'm finding the most raised areas and I'm bringing these back up to colour with a thin layer of Zandri Dust. Here on his arm you can see where the shade settled in all of these recesses, so I'm coming in on either side of those recesses with some pure Zandri Dust, bringing them back up to their original brighter colour, but leaving the Agratzer shade showing in the recesses. Remember to keep your paint nice and thin at this stage. Just catch those raised areas where the Agratzer shade didn't settle. And after we've applied that Zandri Dust, you can see it's brought some of those areas of clothing back up to a brighter colour. And now, with a 50-50 mix of Zandri Dust and Ushabti bone, I'm going to come in and place a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Zandri Dust. So focusing this towards the most raised areas and highest points of detail, and putting a little bit of this mix as we start building up towards our brightest highlights on this fabric. So when you apply this, you should be able to see a little bit of the Agraxur shade in the recess, then some of the Xandri dust, and then a little bit of this mix as we move towards the highest points. And with that mix applied, it's added that transition as we're building up towards our brighter highlights. So now with some pure Ushabti bone, I'm going to come in and once again place this in the middle of where we just applied our last step. So really keep this focused towards the highest points, most raised details. Just come in and put a little bit of Ushabti bone on all the highest folds, most prominent creases of his underclothing. And with that Ushabti bone applied, there's just one more colour to apply to highlight this fabric. That'll be with some Screaming Skull. I'm going to come in and do an edge highlight on the most prominent details. So all the most raised folds, sharpest creases, I'm just coming in with a little bit of Screaming Skull and applying an edge highlight on all these most raised details. Keep this highlight nice and thin and just apply a small line on all those really prominent folds and sharp creases all over the fabric. And with that Screaming Skull applied, that is all of the light fabric highlighted on the model. So the next step, we're going to start highlighting the hood. So for this, I'm coming in with Mephiston Red again. Much like with the previous steps, wherever the Nuln Oil has settled in the recesses, I'm coming in on either side of it with Mephiston Red, bringing those areas back up to colour. So you can see here the Nuln Oil settled in all the recesses and folds of this hood. So I'm coming in on either side, wherever that shade hasn't settled, bringing it back up to its original Mephiston Red colour, with a thin layer of Mephiston Red. Just make sure you catch all the raised areas that the shades didn't settle. Just catch them all with a thin layer of Mephiston Red. And with that Mephiston Red applied, you can see it's brightened up those areas of the hood, but left the Nuln Oil in all of the recesses. So now with a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm coming in and applying a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Mephiston Red. Once again, like with the previous steps, focusing this towards the most raised points and highest details. And coming in and applying a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Mephiston Red. Keep the paint nice and thin at this stage, and it will allow the other colours to show through, really build up to those nice smooth transitions all over the hood. And with that mix applied, you can see it's brightened up some areas and added that gradient to the raised details of his hood. So now I'm coming in with some pure Evil Sun Scarlet, and once again applying this in the middle of the areas that we just applied those previous layers. to really focus this towards the highest points, sharpest details of that hood, allowing a little bit of the previous colours to show through on either side. Just apply a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet on all those raised details of his hood. And with that Evil Sun Scarlet applied, there's just one final edge highlight left to apply to the hood. And that'll be some Wild Rider Red, which I'm just going to apply as an edge highlight on all the sharpest details of his hood. So a thin line all the way around the rim here. And on the tops of any of the most prominent folds and creases, I'm just going to apply a thin line as an edge highlight on all those sharpest folds. So just make sure you work your way around the hood, picking out those sharpest details with a thin edge highlight. With that Wild Rider Red applied, that is the hood highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to highlight all the black on the model. For this I'm coming in with Eshen Grey. I'm going to apply a chunky highlight around all of the raised details of all the black details on the model. So there'll be areas here like these folds and the very edge of his coat. I'm going to catch all of these with a chunky highlight of Eshen Grey, picking out any of these patches here as well. By applying these as a chunky highlight, you allow us to come in with the next step with another colour which we can place inside these chunky highlights to really give us good highlight all over the black. So just make sure you pick out every edge, every raised detail with a chunky edge highlight of Eshen Grey. And also do this to all of the areas here of his armour as well. Make sure you catch all of these with a chunky highlight of Eshen Grey. With that Eshen Grey applied, it's given us a subtly lighter colour as a chunky highlight around all the raised details on the black. And now with some Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm going to come in and give a thin edge highlight in all the areas we just applied the Eshen Grey. So apply this Mechanica Standard Grey right at the very edges and sharpest points of all of these details. Leave a little bit of the Eshen Grey showing through with the Mechanica Standard Grey at the sides. This will give us a really nice smooth highlight to a lighter colour all over the black. So you keep these lines nice and thin, just focus them onto the sharpest points. So we give a small edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey to all of the details we just applied to the chunky highlight of Eshen Grey. And just take your time at this step and make sure you pick out all of these raised details we applied the chunky highlight to with a much thinner edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. And with that Mechanica Standard Grey applied, that is all of the black details on the Bowmen highlighted. So the next step, we're going to highlight the leather. For this, I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Gawthor brown. For this, I'm going to apply it on all the raised details of the leather. So wherever any of the shade on the Rhinox hide will have settled into the recesses, I'm coming in on the sharpest and most raised points and putting a little bit of this mix just to brighten those areas up. And with that mix applied, you can see it's brightened up some of those areas of leather. So the next step will be to edge highlight these areas. So for this, I'm coming in with some Gawthor brown. Just going to apply an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of any of these leather details. But here, like any raised details around the shoes, I'm just going to catch these with a little edge highlight of Gawthor brown. And on the belts, I'm just going to catch the very edges of the belts with a very thin edge highlight of Gawthor brown, just to make these edges stand out. And with that leather highlighted, there's only a couple of details left to highlight on the miniature now. So with some Rackar flesh, I'm going to come in and highlight the strap on the bow. So for this, I'm placing this where the shade didn't settle, all over that strapping on the bow. I'm going to leave any of the Agrax shades and any of the recesses. Coming in with some Rackar flesh just to bring that strapping back up to its original colour. With that Rackar flesh applied, you can see we've brought that strapping back up to a much brighter colour. So now with some deepkin flesh, I'm going to apply an edge highlight, the very edge of all those areas of strapping, just catching these edges with a very thin line of deepkin flesh as an edge highlight. Keep these lines nice and thin and just apply an edge highlight of deepkin flesh on all the strapping. And with that strapping to the bow highlighted, there's only one step left on the model, and that will be to highlight any of the metallic details. So for this, I'm coming in with Stormhose Silver. I'm going to pick out these areas here, at the tops of his bow, and a little bit of his buckle as well, with the spot highlight. Stormhose Silver. And with that Stormhose Silver applied, that is how to paint a peasant bowman for your Bretonnian army in the old world. All that's left to do is to pick your own heraldry and paint it on the shield in the middle of his chest. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, what other models from the old world would you like to see me paint? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!